Chapter 24, Year 889 PXF, Late Autumn. Osmond's would-be stalker had shrunk back down into the tall grass at the ridge of the hill and was currently out of sight. "I'm hoping that water skin on your hip holds more of that fine cider from earlier." Osmond pulled a rough-hewn pewter mug out of his pack and placed it on the ground beside him, ready to be filled. "I'm happy to share some rabbit in trade if you are interested." Osmond continued preparing the rabbit, letting his offer simmer. After a few minutes without response, Osmond kept talking. "I saw you behind the bar at the cidery earlier, yes? Maybe you know something of the people I spoke about?" After getting the rabbit affixed on a spit and banking the fire low for cooking, there was still no answer from behind the hill. "Maybe you were just curious about an Uldani visiting your orchard. Perhaps when you were just a boy, you saw an Uldani dueling in the streets of Arnador with the knight captain I spoke of?" Osmond was running out of ideas and began to wonder if his visitor actually knew anything at all about Talon. "His name was Osmond." The voice came from a different direction than where Osmond had spotted the teen spying on his camp as the matriarch. Whoever this kid was, he had skills to move quietly enough that Osmond's heightened senses had not tracked it. "Indeed it was," Osmond answered cautiously. For the boy to know his name, he must have been more than just a one-time observer of their Hearth's Rest duels, perhaps the son of a tavern keep or merchant. Maybe even one of the orphans he and Talon made a point of including in their antics. "How can I convince you to join me at my fire?" Osmond asked. "Ask me something about the last knight captain of Arnador that would prove I mean him no harm." There was a long silence, and then the question came. "Where did you dine before becoming the companion of the knight captain?" The question was not at all what Osmond was expecting. Perhaps this was the son of one of the alleymen he used to visit. Osmond warily answered, "Many places, but mostly in the alleys near the brothels. Old Man Frederick's alley stew was a staple of mine, even though it tasted as awful as it sounds." The teen emerged from over the hill and walked resolutely into the firelight toward Osmond. There was something hauntingly familiar about the way he moved. "If it were anyone else, I would think you were his son, but I know that can't be the case," Osmond pondered aloud to the approaching figure. "Who are you?" The young man walked straight up to Osmond and hugged him tightly. After a moment, he stepped back, grabbed Osmond by the shoulders, and said, "The man I was you called your Kroldran, and this man I became called you his. Neither would have survived without you as a part of their lives." "I don't understand," Osmond said. "Talon Corvermain died, but the part of him that was your Kroldran lives on in me. I am Thorn." The earnestness of Thorn's proclamation as he looked up at Osmond erased any of Osmond's wariness, but it could not assuage all his doubts. "You better open that cider," Osmond said as he sat down on the bedroll. "And I thought I was going to have a hard time explaining things," he added with a smirk. Thorn began to tell Osmond the tale of all that had happened in his life since they last saw each other. Osmond listened intently to Thorn's descriptions of Oldstone and his dragonborn brother, Nazji. Thorn's details about the curse and his physical changes lent added clarity to what Osmond had seen in the Sullenfell. Thorn paused the recounting of his life and asked, "What is it? You still wear your emotions on your face, and I can see something is troubling you." Looking into the fire, Osmond said, "I had an encounter with one of the primordial guardians of the Isles during my exile. It showed me things written upon the memory of the world." He turned to Thorn, continuing, "Hidden things about Talon, his father, and mine. The stuff of nightmares, perhaps better left unknown." Osmond could see Thorn was digesting his words. He probably should have waited, but the glow of gratitude was like a sunrise in his chest, so he started to speak again. "I saw the chains that bound you on the day of the revolt." Osmond's eyes welled with the memory of what he saw. "Thousands of chains surrounding you, binding your limbs and ripping you apart to try and force your hand. Every one of them wanted you to murder me." Osmond's tears began to fall from his wide eyes, looking into Thorn's. "And you saved me, even after I betrayed you, leaving you to face your fate alone." Osmond could not decipher the fleeting expressions that played upon Thorn's face as he said, "Honestly, sometimes I wonder how Talon resisted the will of the chains, and if I would be strong enough to do the same." Thorn continued, voice filled with the love he still felt for his little brother. "But with every part of my being, I would try to do the same." Osmond reached out and squeezed Thorn's hand. It felt small compared to how Talon's hand used to engulf his own. But even with the physical change, their hands still seemed to fit together like a key in a lock. He said earnestly, "I owe you my life, as well as all I have become. I recognize how miraculous it was that you didn't kill me that day. Not a miracle of the gods, but one of your own making." Thorn cleared his throat exactly as Talon used to when his emotions began to well up inside of him. "You saw the Vermilion Blade's chains?" Thorn said, amazement filling his voice. "They are the very essence of its power that I only ever revealed to one other person. For you to even know of their existence makes me believe whatever hidden things you saw were grounded in truth." Osmond heard the trepidation in Thorn's statement, so he added, "The Vermilion Blade's chains were not all that bound you. Another vile black chain, grown out of your soul's core, tethered you to some source beneath your father's estate." Thorn's face showed horror and shame, but he slowly nodded in affirmation. Osmond squeezed Thorn's hand harder. "But they were not the worst that I saw." Osmond paused, giving Thorn one last chance to halt his words. When no objection came, he finished. "Your father wove the last chains from Riken's love, a chain that crawled through your veins and infected your body. He used it to violate and mold your flesh into the twisted image of what he wanted you to become." Thorn swallowed the information down like a bitter drought. I had begun to suspect as much. Thorn dropped Osmond's hand from his own and began pacing around the fire. "The beast that attacked Riken, the bite, it was more than just an infection, wasn't it? It was a magical parasite. It fed on Riken's life force, and when my father tried to banish it, the parasite killed Riken and fed on his soul." There was no way for Osmond to soften the blow of the words. Thorn fell to the ground, his knees buckling under him. "He's dead? All these years, I assured myself I would have felt it if he died. How long?" When Osmond didn't immediately answer, Thorn demanded, "How long?" 35 years, Osmond said as gently as he could. "But it's more complicated than that." Thorn leapt back to his feet. "Complicated?" He thundered at Osmond. "Complicated? For 35 years I have chased a phantom. I have been manipulated endlessly by people and gods and forces beyond my understanding. All with the hope and promise that we would find each other again, even for one single day. And he has been dead all along." Thorn sat hard on the ground across the campfire from Osmond, placing his head in his hands. Osmond barely discerned him whisper, "A whole life wasted on a lie." Osmond got up and crossed to Thorn to sit beside him. Thorn knocked Osmond's arm away the first few times he tried to lay it across his shoulders to comfort him, but eventually he relented. When he finally did, Thorn threw his arms around Osmond, all but crawling into his lap like a child, and wept. "Thorn, listen," Osmond said once he felt Thorn was capable of hearing his words. "You never felt Riken's absence because he never made his final journey with the last friend. My father cared for his soul until it could be reborn." Thorn lifted his head off Osmond's shoulder, eyes filled with hope. "And that is what my friends and I have done. What I have done for you, Krotran. 27 years ago, Riken was reborn and taken to a place where he would be safe from your father's gaze and Hellsborn schemes." "Reborn?" Thorn asked. 27 years ago? I don't understand." Thorn climbed out of Osmond's embrace and sat beside him. "You are not the only one who has had a strange journey, brother," Osmond said with a slight smile. "But before we get too far into the rest, you should know what my father did for you. For us." It still felt strange to Osmond to think of his father with kindness, but there was no denying what he sacrificed for them both. To keep your father unaware that he had cleansed Riken's soul, my father transferred the parasite to himself. Once transferred, it was the energy of my father's soul that Tommen infused into you up until the time of his death. Osmond licked his lips and proceeded carefully. When Talon died, and all the chains binding him were shattered, that energy from my father began flowing out of you and was drawn back to its source. Or, more aptly, the next closest thing. Me. Thorn took Osmond's larger hand in his own, comparing the two. Concern marred his expression. Is that why you have grown? Have I passed the violation of my flesh onto you? Thorn shook his head in dismay and self-disgust. No, it isn't like that. Osmond considered a moment. Not directly, at least. Too many higher powers were at work for it to be that easy. I think a component of what I've become came from Tommen's arcane intent to mold your flesh. But this, Osmond motioned to himself, was not of his design or intent. What have you become then? Thorn asked. It's probably easier to show you, but it means you won't have any rabbit for dinner, and I might need to step away and hunt, Osmond replied. While I always enjoy fresh rabbit, I brought more than cider. I have some fresh-picked apples and turnovers Gwen made. I won't starve, Thorn quipped. Osmond took the half-cooked rabbit off the fire and laid it on the ground, noting Thorn's questioning looks. He then closed his eyes and channeled the spirit of the judge. Osmond felt the familiar flurry of ice surround him, and his flesh and soul expanded into his Saldric form. Whoa! Thorn said, wide-eyed as he took a step back. As Osmond's senses fully merged with the judge, there was an instant recognition of Thorn's scent. It was nearly the same as his own. Both Osmond and Thorn now contained the echoes of the power their fathers had infused into Talon's soul. The judge knew them to be soul-bound together as brothers in more than name or title. Thorn moved slowly and put out his hands in a non-threatening way. Osmond, how much of you is in there? Osmond let a deep purr rumble in his chest and rubbed his head and muzzle against Thorn's side, nearly lifting him off the ground. Okay, I get it, Thorn said playfully as Osmond pressed the judge's forehead against Thorn's chest. Thorn's arms could barely reach around the judge's head to scratch under his jaw. The two leaned into the strange embrace, which seemed somehow more profound than their hug from earlier. It had felt strange listening to Thorn speak about his life and Talon in the third person. A disorientation in seeing the physical shape of Thorn, but having the emotional history and connection to Talon. Osmond had begun to sense it before, but now, through the judge's eyes, it was so obvious. His bond to Talon was never due to his hulking size, position as knight captain, or martial skills. Osmond's connection was with the part of Talon that he hid from the world, the part Osmond had coaxed out of his stoic exterior. His love had been for the man he saw inside. Thorn was the part of Talon that had always been his Krodran. There is so much I want to know and understand about your life, Thorn said with genuine interest and care. However, I assume the comment about the rabbit is because a change like that must pull vast amounts of energy from somewhere if it is anything like the magics I studied with Naz. Thorn looked to the rabbit and then back to Osmond. But brother, you are huge. I've seen smaller horses, and that rabbit will be barely a mouthful for you. Osmond saw a twinkle in Thorn's eye. You mentioned hunting. Thorn let the statement hang before adding. And since you are nearly the size of a horse, and I am... Osmond was surprised at the judge's upswelling of kittenish deference and need for approval in his attitude toward Thorn. Before Osmond could even think, the judge lunged forward, forcing his muzzle between Thorn's legs, and tossed him over his head and onto his back. Osmond felt Thorn scramble to turn himself around and get a secure hold on the ruff of the judge's neck. Osmond looked over his shoulder to make sure Thorn was ready. His brother sat with a smile beaming upon his face, an open and honest joy Osmond had never seen expressed by Talon, but he always knew was there. The same profound joy filled Osmond. He could feel the resonating truth that he was seeing his Krodran in the flesh for the first time. He let out a roar, the likes of which were utterly unknown upon the shores of Elerion. It echoed across the hills and lowlands, stirring the breeze and chilling it with the echoes of Kaiflanor. Osmond had found his brother once more. Osmond and Thorn leaped into the night, the moonlight igniting the judge's fur into a ghostly luminescence as the evening fog spread its tendrils across the land. Osmond's powerful strides and leaps carried them as fast as any horse, and he quickly latched onto the scent of boar. Osmond didn't even slow, pouncing into the small glade where his prey slumbered, dispatching it before it could squeal. Osmond apologetically looked over his shoulder at Thorn as he tore into the boar's viscera. "Doesn't bother me," Thorn replied. His hair had come loose from the leather thong that had secured it, forming a wild mane framing his head. "You want me to hop down while you eat? I guess that's probably easier." By the time Thorn had dismounted and pulled an apple out of his pack, the boar was gone. Osmond glanced over at Thorn, who had sat down and leaned against a small wild plum tree to eat his apple. Nostalgia hit Osmond like a blow, seeing Thorn sit in such a familiar pose. But there was something else. The apple was more than it seemed. Osmond blinked his Saldric eyes over to Veilsight, but it revealed nothing. The apple appeared as nothing more than it should. A sly, feminine voice he had never heard before entered his mind. "A treasure hidden in plain sight." The trickster. Osmond padded over to Thorn and sniffed at the apple. "You want one?" Thorn offered, pulling another from his pack and holding it out to Osmond. Osmond delved into whatever insight the instincts of the spirits within him could give. The judge, who was always wary of hidden danger. The matriarch in all her experience and attunement to magic. The prince, with his resistance to poisons, and the trickster's initial reaction. With no objection and a swipe of his massive tongue, he swept the offered apple into his maw and ate it. The effect was immediate. Osmond felt as though he tapped into the life energy of every living thing for miles around him. It flowed into the judge like a torrent with its blinding radiance. Osmond felt every part of himself and the spirits within him filled to overflowing with divine light. With a shimmer of arcane incandescence, Osmond channeled back into his Uldani form. He grabbed Thorn's hand and asked reverently, "Where did you get that? What is it?" Thorn looked at Osmond as he finished his own apple, looking more perplexed than when Osmond had turned into 800 pounds of saber-toothed predator before his eyes. "It's an apple. I picked it from the orchard this morning," he answered. "That's not just an apple," Osmond stated. Thorn looked at the remaining core in his hand and then wondered out loud. "Maybe it's not." He looked at Osmond. "How did you—" Osmond answered before Thorn could finish his question. "Its connection to the land is indescribable in its scale. A well of energy beyond anything I've experienced. You feel nothing?" "No, and I have eaten hundreds of these over the last 5 years. I have an idea of what it could be, and what you describe makes sense if what I suspect is true, but—" Thorn glanced at the surrounding countryside, taking in their surroundings and marking their location. "Perhaps we shouldn't talk about it here." Osmond looked around and, after a few moments, recognized where they were. Less than a league from the Cour Vermain estate. "Perhaps not," he replied. Thorn looked at Osmond and the bloody stain on the ground where the boar had been. "Does this mean we're going to have to walk?" "Actually, the opposite. The apple is like nothing I have ever felt before. I usually need to eat after each time I soul channel, change forms," Osmond clarified for Thorn. "Or there's a cost. But the apple is something different. It is like every part of me is overflowing with vitality. Like I took a sip from every living entity for miles around." "So, Saldrig again? You were a Saldrig, right?" Thorn asked. Talon read about them as a boy. "Yes," Osmond confirmed. "Oh, and he likes you. A lot. We call him the Judge, and he only tolerates most people. But you—" Osmond paused. "He knows you're his big brother." Osmond scratched the back of his head awkwardly. Our souls have the same scent. Thorn grabbed each of Osmond's upper arms in his own, and with an earnest look said, I would have it no other way, and that makes a lot of sense, considering. Osmond's smile beamed at Thorn. Fair warning, he is like a kitten around you. A very large, very playful kitten. I can hold him back, but if you're up for it, he really wants to have some playtime with his big brother. Can't say I have ever sparred with a Saldrig, but I'm here for it. Also, remind me to tell you about the mining machine Naz and I fought in Oldstone, Thorn replied. Osmond flurried into the judge's flesh, and Thorn leaped upon his back. By the time they got back to Osmond's camp, the moon was low, the fog was rising, and any scant warmth the late autumn day had offered had turned into the frosty chill of night. Thorn slid off Osmond's back and stoked the fire's last embers. I wasn't thinking ahead when I came, Thorn said, breath fogging as he looked at the single bedroll Osmond had laid out. Osmond gave Thorn a playful bat with his huge Saldrig paw and flopped down beside the bedroll. Thorn took the message immediately, laid on the bedroll, and put his head against the judge's chest, who began to purr peacefully. Good night, brother, Thorn said, looking up into Osmond's feline eyes. Good night, Crodran, Osmond said internally, and before he could intervene, the judge gave Thorn a mighty lick with his tongue. Good night, Judge, Thorn replied, scratching the sensitive spot between the judge's forelegs. Sleep found them all, as the moon set and the stars overhead arced through the firmament.